and welcome to the Gender Justice Initiative. I'm Denise Brennan. I'm co-director of the GJI, and I am just in awe of the panelists that we have here today who are really on the front lines of fighting migrant, racial, and reproductive justice. I first just want to let everyone know that the GJI is sponsoring an event tomorrow. You can go to our website and sign up on Black women voters, activists, and politicians. You can ask questions. We're going to have time towards the end of the dialogue. You can ask questions through the Q&A function. So again, I'm just deeply grateful to our very busy freedom fighters to be with us here today. I'm going to read their bios and then turn the mic over to them. Alejandro Pablos is a social justice organizer, activist, and writer working at the intersection of immigration and reproductive justice. Born south of the Mexico border, Alejandro was raised in Santa Ana, California, and later moved to Tucson, Arizona, where she first learned what it means to be a person of color in the US. Alejandra graduated from the University of Arizona with a BA in communications. During her youth, she was arrested and convicted of several charges, including some of which were felonies under Arizona state law. The arrests, combined with an immigration system that targets people with a criminal record, particularly felonies, led to Alejandra's detention by ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, at a routine probation visit. As Alejandra realized, there was nothing, quote, permanent about her residency status. She spent 2 years at the Eloy Detention Center in Southern Arizona. She lost her residency and was placed in deportation proceedings, even though her parents were naturalized citizens. Since, she has been targeted by ICE for deportation and is fighting for her freedom. Alejandra is currently organizing her own deportation defense campaign called #KeepAle Free in order to stay permanently with her community. Azadeh Shahshahani is the legal and advocacy director for Project South, an Atlanta-based organization whose mission is to cultivate strong social movements and develop strategies in response to social issues in the southern region of the US. Azadeh has worked for a number of years in the US South to protect and defend immigrants and Muslim, Middle Eastern, and South Asian communities. She is the author or editor of several human rights reports, including a 2017 report titled Imprisoned Justice, Inside 2 Georgia Immigrant Detention Centers, as well as law review articles and book chapters focused on racial profiling, immigrants' rights, and surveillance of Muslim Americans. She previously served as president of the National Lawyers Guild and as National Security Immigrants' Rights Project Director with the ACLU of Georgia. Azadeh serves on the Advisory Council of the American Association of Jurists and on the Board of Directors of Defending Rights and Dissent, among other initiatives. She has been recognized as an abolitionist by the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University and the Frederick Douglass Families Initiatives, and is one of Atlanta's 500 Most Powerful Leaders by Atlanta Magazine. In 2016, Azadeh was chosen by the Mundo Hispanico newspaper as an Outstanding Person of the Year for defending the rights of immigrants in Georgia. And last, Silky Shah is the executive director for the Detention Watch Network, a national coalition dedicated to ending the immigration detention center system in the US. She has worked as an organizer on issues related to immigration detention, mass incarceration, and racial and migrant justice for over 15 years. In her time at Detention Watch Network, she has helped transform the organization into a national leader in the immigrant rights movement, leading campaigns to expose the system and building the capacity of grassroots members to fight back against mass detention expansion. Prior to joining DWN in 2009, Silky worked with grassroots leadership, fighting the expansion of immigrant jails on the US-Mexico border, and with the independent news program, Democracy Now! In New York. Welcome all. So Silke, I know you're going to kick this off and kind of give us an overview. And I was hoping you could speak to this latest revelation of ongoing brutality as an integral part of this carceral system that many refer to as torture facilities and concentration camps. In other words, we see that cruelty is baked in and reforms won't work. And I just wanted to share with our attendees some things that had jumped out at me and some reports that we're going to drop in the chat for you all. One woman thought she had a cyst, and the doctor performing these forced procedures removed her fallopian tube, claiming that it was clogged, and she never gave her consent. Women were fearing these procedures so terribly that one requested deportation because she thought she, quote, would lose her reproductive system, and she ended up being deported anyway. Others were threatened with psychiatric referrals if they didn't comply with these procedures. So I think this just sets the table as just one slice of what Silke is going to share with us as how these forced gynecological procedures could unfold alongside many other forms of brutality. Thank you, Silke.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's wonderful to be here, and especially with Azadeh and Ale, who are longtime DWN members, and we've been working on this fight for many, many years. And despite what happened on Saturday, we will continue this fight likely for many, many years. And hopefully not forever, because I know we want to get rid of the system. So I wanted to, start out by giving a little bit of an overview of detention so everyone can kind of be on the same page of what the system is we're talking about. I think sometimes people are confused about why people are in detention. And, the reason why Detention Watch Network focuses on the issue of detention is, one, because we don't believe in, this sort of punitive model of incarceration that is very much an American model that is extreme in so many ways and punitive and harmful. And so that's one piece. Obviously, we just don't believe in people being incarcerated in this way, and then, or in general. And then I think there's this other piece really about how much detention is a key driver of deportation. So you have this sort of exclusion that happens by people being incarcerated, but then you have this like other level of sort of banishment that happens with people being deported out of this country. And so I think the detention system exists to really facilitate that deportation and make it easier to deport people. And that's the other reason we work on it. And the people who are inside detention are really a range of people, as we are hearing with Ale's story. You have people who are legal permanent residents, you have people who are seeking asylum, people who are undocumented, a huge range of, like, anybody who doesn't have naturalized citizenship can be detained, or citizenship. So the detention system actually is a mix of people who have been targeted within the interior of the country by ICE agents or local police, and then also people who are coming in through the border by CBP agents. So it's really a mix of what's happening inside. And in terms of where we're at right now with detention, we have roughly 215 detention centers, jails, prisons. They are jails and prisons. That's what they are, where people are held across the country. All but 5 of the facilities are contracted out to either private prison companies or local governments, county jails, state facilities, that have contracts with ICE. About 80% of that, set of facilities and those set of beds that are available are operated by private prisons now. And, it's been sort of a fluctuating system, especially because of COVID. But the height that we got to was over 50,000 beds under the Trump administration. And towards the end of the Obama administration, we're about 38,000. So we did see a significant amount of growth, especially in Louisiana. during this period of Trump being in office. And, you know, I think so much, I mean, we probably talk about this more, so much about what's happened with the detention system is related to what's shifting based on who is in office. But what we know is that since the 80s, we didn't used to have detention this way. And in the early 80s, in fact, in so many ways, an attack of Black migrants coming to Florida, they started detaining more and more people. From a criminalization perspective, so much of what happens here is because there is this sort of nativist ideology that immigrants are a quote unquote national security or public safety threat. And so since the 80s, we've seen more and more, not just through the policies of different presidents, but also through congressional action, a change in laws. And that has just really overgrown the system. So in the early 80s, we had a few thousand people in detention, and now we have over 50,000. Of course, COVID has shifted things and actually has been this sort of experiment for us to say, okay, what is it actually? We actually don't need to detention. Like, can we like make this case even more clear? Not just because this sort of bigger question of why do we put people in pretrial detention, but also because spaces of detention are places where the virus grows. And sort of going back to your question, Denise, I mean, I think when we look at this system, I think there's these particular moments when we talk about family separation, when we talk about the hysterectomies, all these people that are pieces that are just so horrifying. And everyone's like, wow, we clearly this system is a problem, or clearly something's not going right. Often the answer by, you know, decision makers, people who are in power to make these decisions is, well, let's investigate, let's see what happened. What are the accountability mechanisms? What can we do? And then the response has been, well, we need better medical care, or, you know, we need to, I remember after the family separation crisis, a lot of advocates and a lot of people in power are pushing, well, maybe family detention's better. And I think those are really, that's sort of the problem with not having vision in this moment. What we actually need is, you know, again, these are what we see in the detention system. It's not a system that needs to exist. People who have who are going through proceedings, whether they were caught up in the interior of the country or coming through the border, have families, have people they can be with, have homes they can be in while they go through their cases. They do not need to be incarcerated. And ultimately, you know, there's beyond that, there's a huge reform needed to immigration law to say, actually, our response for an immigration system should not be one that is exclusionary and punitive, but one that is really promoting protection and care for people, because that's why they're coming here, or that's why they're, you know, the people who already live here who are being targeted too. So you know, I don't want to take up too much time, but just wanted to give a sense of where we're at with the system. It's a very large system and it's going to take time to dismantle. I think we, you know, I will say with Trump, a lot of people have opened their eyes. I think we need to understand, again, it's not about making nicer cages. It's not about better medical care or more, you know, I remember in the Obama administration, there was talk of softer materials and that kind of thing. That's not what we're looking for. I think what we really know to be true is that people need freedom, and we need to do everything we can to fight for that. So I'll leave it there.
I wanted to add to that, Silky, too, because I have like, as I've been fighting my case and talking to people, legislating for like federal legislation, like the New Way Forward, that really decriminalizes migration, right? We talk about mandatory detention, mandatory deportation. We heard a lot, Julian Castro talking about 1325 and 1327, right? To decriminalize that, because when people are coming to the border, it automatically gives them a felony, right? And if they already had been here, if they've been deported and they're coming to reunify with their families here, right, they get another felony and get locked up, right? And when I talk about this, because of Julian Castro, a lot of people at the Hill in Congress say like, oh, well, this is like an open borders policy, you know? And I'm like, you know, why is it that immigration is so racialized in the sense that like white people get to have open borders, white people get to go become citizens and residents into our countries, and Mexico is super easy, you know? So I'm always just pushing back, like immigration shouldn't be punitive, and also like we have the right as human beings to move and remain where we want, move and look for like the best conditions for our families or whatnot. So like, just really wanted people to think about like, if other people have it, why not us? Right? Why can't we have that? Why can't we be able to just get up and go, right? And search for the jobs we want, or the, you know, because it's always like economic reasons people travel and migrate. Some people just want to fucking travel. Some people just want to move to another place, just like affluent people going buy houses across the world. But we can't have that, right? So I want to, this is for me, for other people like myself, that I'm like, we have to dream bigger, you know, like we deserve these things. We deserve to travel past these imaginary borders. And yeah, anyways, but yeah, thanks Silky for sharing.
Well, Alejandra, it's your time in the queue, and I know you're very generously going to share with us your own experience of a whole assortment of brutalities in detention centers. Thanks, Alejandra.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone here. Thank you everybody for showing up, you know, for caring about immigration, around reproductive justice, for staying active even in a new presidency, right? I'm glad y'all had your joy. Let's you know, make sure that we get back to being activated, because there's still detention centers, right? There's still a refugee camp at the border. Supreme Court judges are still reigning. So sorry, my mom is calling me from outside. And I think it's important for us to just like stay super active and aware, and be with like-minded people, right? Like us, that we know that we have to keep fighting for everyone, that there's still not justice, right? And so yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Alejandra. Again, I'm a storyteller, trying to be a writer. That's a whole ass skill, but I do share my story a lot. And one of the biggest lessons I just want to share, you know, I know that you shared a little bit about my incarceration. I've been going in and out of the court systems, you know, since being introduced in Arizona to just over sentencing, hyper policing in Arizona, the south side of Tucson, you know, the Maricopa County. This is where I grew up, and this is what has really informed me, and understood that my life is super racialized, super criminalized. So I've been going in and out of court systems as I was probably like a teen, late teen. When, you know, when I was detained in 2011 for the first time with the residency, I really didn't understand what was happening in my own backyard. I had a lot of privilege, having mixed status families, but still a lot of us have citizenship or residency. And, you know, 2011 was only a year after SB 1070, right? And you know, I already had been arrested for a DUI in Maricopa County, right? Not understanding the movement and what was happening and why people were fighting Arpaio, but he was out there hunting us down and looking for us, you know? So I come from that, those harms as well. And, you know, going inside of the detention center for the first time after being like a teacher in the public school system, and like already having these like natural organizing skills. When I was detained, I really didn't understand what was happening. I was like, I'm a resident. I got to call my mom. She's a citizen. It's all going to work out. Still super oblivious. But then I started traveling through the ice boxes, right? I traveled through an ice box in Arizona, 2 of them just to get to Eloy. And it really, really shocked me. And that's where the brainwashing started, you know, started from the state sanctioned violence. That's where I started to feel like, oh, I deserve this. I did something like wrong. I'm not permanently, I'm illegal, right? And that's where it started. I started to see how people all across the world were coming here for some sort of safety, but just were being, you know, welcomed with more violence and cages for no reason, right? Even for myself, I could say like I already had, you know, I was in the rehabilitation process, right? They picked me up from probation, right? Imagine disrupting that, not being able to like do, you know, move past things that I've done in my life. When I was charged for DUI, I got 2 months for work furlough in a county jail, and white folks and affluent folks, basically white folks who were doing 24 hours for their first DUI. And I did 2 months, 2 years probation, which again is what brought me into being in detention. So again, seeing this like over surveillance, just targeting, just criminalization, not being able to just move on past that, right? So anyways, being inside really like made me fall in love with people all over again. I started to see how, wow, we really have no benefit of the doubt here. They see us just like enemies or people coming to harm, or we're lying if we're asking for healthcare inside. It's really, really, really scary. And I had the privilege of language, right? I had the privilege to defend myself with English. So I quickly became organizing inside to kind of like, quote unquote, like defend people right inside, because they, a lot of the agents are trained to see you like, again, as an enemy, no benefit of the doubt, as if you're here to just steal instead of needing support. And a lot of the folks also were already people who have roots here, right? Like Silky said, I'm a permanent resident, I've been here all my life. A lot of people were there also, that had been there with a lot of roots, that had done their time already, but then ICE went to go grab them because the prison system collaborates with ICE, right? That's why defund the police movement is super important for people like me, because less policía, less migra, less cops, right? Less police collaborations. We don't have to have contracts to like work with them. They're still doing in-house transfers. They're literally the same entity. So um, yeah, just being inside really was like, I have to come home and I have to fight in here for my life, because there is no option of me actually being deported. Like, I'm not going to get deported. That's not real. And every day my affirmations lead me to a world where I actually have freedom and I'm living in freedom. So that's why a lot of people call me an unapologetic storyteller, right? Because I believe that sharing my story, those stories of like that my mom kept away from people, right? When I was detained for 2 years, my mom never shared it to my family. I wasn't even able to have support fully from my family because of the shame, right, of being in detention. So I think that's another place that when we're inside the healthcare, like people are scared even to ask for healthcare, because if you have to get travel to another hospital outside because they don't have the things that they need to take care of us there. I remember being like, I would never ask for healthcare in there because I would have to get handcuffed and travel through the city and be shown off in that way. And I was ashamed, right? I was ashamed of everything in there. So I think that is something that I think about. The fact that, again, there's no consent being practiced inside, right? People are sharing people's information, making decisions over the people inside, over their own autonomy. That's scary as hell. So I just really think of the person who shared about the hysterectomies and got deported the next day. People like us that speak up, like, we have to understand that we are going to get reprimanded. We are going to have political repression. And it's really unfortunate that this person got deported, and hope we can bring her back. But yeah, just again, inside it's just surreal having like hyper super like hyper, I don't know, phosphorescent, is that how you say it, the lights that are super strong on you. You can never have any peace or darkness to just go to sleep. Your body doesn't rest. And I think that's the thing that we don't talk about enough. Like, our bodies also just deserve rest, just like everybody's else, And I slept on like metal and 1-inch pad for 2 years, which I still have back problems from, right? And I had to go back into that detention center again just 2 years ago under a Trump administration, where under the Trump administration, I was added more charges, in order to make me even like make it even harder for me to fight already with like little defense for non-citizens. So that's been really tough. I had to go back to court again for an asylum hearing, another relief, right? Sharing that I've never lived in Mexico, or, my work as an abortion storyteller, reproductive justice organizer, just my values and my, the way that I voice my opinions can really put me in danger in Mexico, right? So, and then there a judge told me to my face, and said, you deserve your charges. You haven't rehabilitated, even after organizations like DWN, masses of people of y'all that may have signed my petition, hundreds and hundreds of letters and character letters, and like, me being an organizer and all that, it didn't matter to them, because it's like, who am I pleading to, right? Already a white supremacist administration that literally wants to cleanse people from people like me. And at the end of the day, we're fighting for people like me, right? So it's just really to be so public on this, and to be able to move past the shit that's happened in my past. And again, I hate to say my mistakes, because let's be real, everybody makes mistakes. We're human. There's so many laws, you're about to break one, right? And I think at the end of the day, these detention centers have broken the laws of humanity, not me. And I refuse to be shamed and to, be in silence, and to act like I don't deserve justice and dignity, and to move on and have a family or whatnot, when literally an ICE and deportation order over my head is making decisions already for me. So I don't know if y'all want to move past while my mom is pouring water over my window.
Alejandra, many, many, many thanks. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions for you. We really appreciate it. So Azadeh, you've been on the front lines quite literally of battling from a legal perspective. And we appreciate all that you're doing. And can you explain how this all got kicked off with the whistleblower, Don Wooten, in addition to, as Alejandra mentioned, unbelievably courageous women that came forward with their own stories?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And I also wanted to thank Silke and Alejandra for your really powerful presentations. It's really an honor to be on this panel with you all. So I'm with Project South. We're a social justice organization based in Atlanta, working in support of grassroots organizations and directly impacted communities in the US South, as well as the Global South. And we have documented conditions at Irving for many years. And what we know is that the treatment of immigrants at this prison has always been horrid. So in our 2017 report, Imprisoned Justice, inside 2 Georgia immigrant detention centers, Project South and the Penn State Law Center for Immigrants' Rights Clinic found evidence of sexual abuse, inadequate medical care, lack of prenatal care for pregnant women, lack of clean drinking water, and rampant use of solitary confinement at the facility. And then in April, a group of women at Irving got together and produced a video about their fear of catching COVID and the fact that the facility wasn't doing anything to basically protect them from this disease. And instead of addressing their concerns, the facility run by a private prison corporation put them in solitary confinement. And as a result, they were all subjected to really grave emotional pain after getting out of solitary. We decided, based on what we were hearing from the women, as well as Ms. Wooten, a courageous whistleblower whom we are honored to represent along with the Government Accountability Project, to go ahead and submit a complaint to the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General, along with our partners, GLAR, Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, Georgia Detention Watch, and the South Georgia Support Network. And just some of the issues that we documented were that medical staff were deliberately not testing detained immigrants for COVID-19, even when they're symptomatic, have pre-existing conditions, and or have requested to be tested multiple times, spanning a month. And in fact, they refused to test people up until Project South submitted another complaint a couple months ago about this, and then only then they started to test people. And the management deliberately lying to both detained immigrants and employees about how many COVID cases there are in the facility, and a range of other issues. And so the shocking revelations about medical abuse against women's bodies further highlight the extent of the egregious abuse at the facility, and the fact that Black and brown immigrant women have been held in an extremely vulnerable position at this prison, where they have no control over their bodies and no say about what is done to them, is sickening. So we're glad that our complaint opened the door to more women coming forward with accounts of what was done to them. So 19 cases were documented by the Los Angeles Times, and 57 cases documented by our team of lawyers working together, as was reported by The Intercept recently. Not surprisingly, ICE has not been forthcoming with information if it was not because of the documentation work happening and advocates' efforts to track down and reach out to women all over the world and courage of the impacted women. None of this would have ever come to light. And I should say that ICE is actually actively attempting to deport witnesses and survivors of medical abuse. So they're actively trying to basically erase evidence of wrongdoing. So given what we have learned about the systematic violence against immigrants' bodies at Irving, we need ICE to come clean about what is happening at facilities nationwide. Immigrants can't have their bodily integrity at the mercy of ICE and the private prison corporations that the agency contracts with. So that's why we filed the Freedom of Information Act request to obtain information about gynecological procedures at ICE facilities nationwide over a month ago. We did not receive any information, so we filed a lawsuit. We joined forces with a couple other groups, CREW and the National Immigration Project of the National Lawyers Guild, to file a lawsuit and hopefully discover more information. But it pains me to know that there could be many more women out there in different parts of the world who will never be able to talk about what happened to them and the abuse that they suffered while at Irving, let alone receive a measure of redress while living with the lifelong damage to their bodies and spirits. And the scrutiny must not stop with the actions of examining the actions of one individual. This is about ICE and the private prison corporation LaSalle. Irving should be shut down immediately and people should be freed. And the United States government, as well as the private prison corporation running this prison, should be held accountable. So we're glad that some members of Congress are taking this seriously. There was a resolution introduced by Representative Jayapal that passed overwhelmingly, condemning the forced gynecological procedures and asking for an investigation. 12 members of Congress, including Representative Jayapal, also came down, met with the women, and I think that was a really transformative experience for some of them, because when they got out, they called it a horror show and started calling for Irving to be shut down. And Representative Tlaib and other members of the squad also led a letter to the UN High Commissioner, basically asking them to investigate the Department of Homeland Security. And this definitely is the first time, at least in recent history, that members of Congress are asking on the United Nations to investigate the actions of the US, a branch of the US government. So we're determined to push ahead by pursuing a thorough congressional investigation, DHS OIG investigation, and we will also go to the United Nations and the Inter-American Commission to expose the human rights violations. And I would like to leave you with this quote from Fannie Lou Hamer: "Nobody's free until everybody's free." Thank you.
Thank you, Azadeh. That's a great segue. I wanted to talk about approaching everything in this discussion with an abolitionist framework. And I'm wondering, with the three of you, maybe in a dialogue, if you could riff a little bit about how approaching these issues from the different angles you're taking. You know, Alejandra, you put your body on the line, and every time you tell your story, you know, it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of labor. Silky, you're working with families throughout the country and you're trying to pressure political powers. And Azadeh, you're using lawsuits and freedom of information. And I'm wondering if you can sort of walk through for our attendees why all these different levels of social change are essential.
I can start as a lawyer, and I guess I identify as a movement lawyer. So it's a very different concept of lawyering, meaning the law is really at the service of lawyers. And I think definitely lawsuits and legal sort of tools have their limitations. Again, I'm very cognizant of this as a lawyer. It's good to have the legal skills and good to have sort of, the legal tools at our disposal when necessary. But, we definitely should not be confined by those. And, we saw this when it came to Irving, the facility we're talking about, right? So there were lawsuits filed in the spring along with lawsuits across the country. Some of those other lawsuits were successful in terms of getting people out in light of the pandemic. But the one that was filed, against Irving and Stewart to try to get people out, the elderly, people with pre-existing conditions in the midst of the pandemic, because of the conservative courts that we have, where we are, they unfortunately did not succeed. So, if you were kind of gonna look at this traditionally as, lawyers will say, okay, we tried and, everything we could, we already did, and so we should move on and, too bad. But no, I mean, there was a movement in place for a number of years to try to shut this place down. the reporting, the human rights documentation, the organizing, the visitation, and that is what led to the complaint. And then, once the complaint kind of got all the attention, national attention, there was a movement on the ground that was ready to respond and organize and to protect the impacted women. And so, I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that we have got to use every tool at our disposal that we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think Azadeh is 100% right. Like this is going to take a lot of different approaches to tackle. I mean, what we're trying to do in abolishing the system it's a major feat, and it's something that's going to take a lot, and all the different aspects that we use, and especially given like just what happened a couple of weeks ago with the Supreme Court moving more to the right. I mean, there's only so far we can go in legal avenues, right? Like, I think it's an important place to, throw wrenches in the system, do whatever we can, but then also so much about our work right now is about building power so we can create the conditions that people in power, decision makers, are forced to move. And that's organizing. That's the work. I mean, I think it's, a lot of times people are like, oh, well, if the media covered this more, or if, ACLU went after this or whatever, it's like, it actually has to be all of those things. It's great that members of Congress are paying attention. It's great that media is covering this, but ultimately this is building power, is about people and communities rising up from the ground up and saying, we want something different. This needs to look different. And in so many ways, I think what abolition has given us and sort of how we think about it is like, there's something we're going towards. And in that process, we can learn together to get closer to liberation and for all of us. And, I think in some ways the challenge for us, especially in a field of immigration, which is so lawyer heavy, people get really stuck in the rule of law or stuck in like the way the systems exist right now. And I think having folks like Azadeh and other movement lawyers who are like, no, this is actually a bigger project here. And we don't have to work just in the confines of the system. I think, legal service and what that provides is mitigating the harm of really harsh immigration laws and really bad policies. It's not abolitionist, but it's important that we do that while we get towards abolition. So offering that.
Yeah, Alejandra, again, I can add that for sure as a reproductive justice organizer and storyteller. Again, I share that, like I share my story and people share back. That is powerful, right? To know that you're not alone, that it's not just you, that it's not individual. Most of us have people, friends, loved ones that we know are in cages or under some sort of surveillance, under some sort of pipeline still, right? Some of our people that we brought home and freed them are just under the radar, right? Because there is no relief for them with immigration. They're just sitting here stateless in a sense, or, waiting for something to happen, maybe legally, right? And I think for me as a reproductive justice storyteller, reproductive justice organizer and storyteller, it's about engaging more than outside of the organizing world, because sometimes organizing can be a little elitist, right? And again, it's part of our culture, absolutely. But for me, I use my story, and I want to talk about abolition, reproductive justice, abortion, unapologetic storytelling, whatever it is, and engage people outside, right, that are not necessarily talking about this. And again, policy will only shift and change once the culture and masses has, right? Right now, we're still having people have joy, even though they know that this President Biden does not want to defund the police. And what have the people been saying nationally? Defund the police. And what is right? Like, so it's like, we have to shift so much this culture through all of these multi-pronged strategies, right, of abolition to get us to a moment where we're going to reject and refuse, right? And we're already there. we were not talking about abolishing ICE, you know, just over 5 years ago or whatever. We have, obviously a lot of communities have, right? We've been impacted and living, you know, at those intersections this whole time. But I think, again, this cultural work of building trust with our people to understand that popular education is going to save our life, right? Because the education we should have, we didn't get it at school. We didn't get it when we were young. We're getting it through these organizing movements. We're getting it through organizations like DWN, like Mi Gente, right? Like Just Futures Laws, just everybody who's really bringing that back to learning collectively and healing collectively. So I think, again, shifting the culture to a culture that rejects policing, because this is still very much a police state, is I think one of the keys to the work that we're doing.
Following up, Alejandra, on this frame of refusal and resilience, can the three of you address specifically how these forced gynecological procedures are part of a long history of trying to commit genocide and erasure of Native, Black, and Brown women?
Yeah, I mean, I can share quickly first that, like, for me, even fighting my deportation case is just like shit. I'm trying to fight deportation on stolen land, right? Where like history of like boarding schools, right? The history again of bodily autonomy and the history of like white supremacy being able to choose population control, right? Who deserves to you know, who deserves to have children and produce and recreate, you know. And we've seen it as a reproductive justice organizer. We talk a lot about, especially in the prison industrial complex system, how people have been, you know, sterilized, again, no consent with their bodies. We heard of, you know, a lot of forced sterilization too, with like Puerto Rican women, right? With women in LA when it came to, you know, again, being taken away their body parts, right? To be able to make decisions that they want to create the families when they want. So I think, again, reproductive justice means having bodily autonomy over your sexuality, your life, your production, your body, and for you to be able to parent if you want to, when you want to parent in safe environment, right? And we can, and I think the biggest threat to that is what? Policing, the prison industrial complex, right? Which all involves La Migra, immigration detention centers. And I think definitely just coming from that lens around like just the fact that they exist is a threat to our bodily autonomy, right? Like parents all around, people who've chosen abortions are already parents too, right? And I think being able to make those decisions because we're the only experts in our lives, right? We're the ones that get to decide. And I think that's what they've been trying to take from us. Like we've already born with this agency and they rip that apart from us because, you know, they're also scared. They're scared of people like us that can create life, you know? I'm gonna start going off into something else, but I'll pass it on to someone else.
I don't know if I mean, I feel like Ale really got to it. I mean, I think the big question here is like, what does it mean for, you know, I was on a talk also with Planned Parenthood recently about this. And, you know, when people say, what does reproductive justice mean in detention? I'm like, it means no detention. There's no scenario where you're going to have reproductive justice in a context of a carceral situation. And so I think that is, you know, that's it. Like you're not, and in so many ways, I think as folks who are watching this, who are engaged in gender justice conversations, like obviously gynecology itself is a, you know, area that has all of its own problems. And then you introduce it in this carceral setting and that even just like exacerbates it. And so I think that's gotta be like the baseline. And then beyond that, you know, one of the things I failed to mention earlier was, you know, 2020, fiscal year 2020, we saw the most deaths in ICE custody in 15 years. So obviously, you know, some of those, I think about 6 of them were because of COVID. But in general, you see again, there was like a moment that deaths continued always over those 15 years, but in this moment when things are becoming harsher, it sort of illuminates what's happening with the system when, you know, people are dying at the rate that they're dying and not getting the care they need in so many ways. And so I think that's like acute even more so for women and people who are vulnerable. And you're looking at like family detention where women are held with their children, and you know, what that does to a family unit, what that experience is like for the child, the harm that causes in the long term. So I think in all these instances, you can clearly show, you know, this is the worst of the system, and we can talk about the worst of the system, but also like there's no scenario where the system is good. So that's why we have to really move in a direction where people, when it comes to their medical care, when it comes to their bodies, like they need to have agency. And obviously that's a bigger fight than just outside of the carceral state, but I think you know, one that we need to help. Like again, it's not about getting a better doctor in Irwin, it's about shutting Irwin down.
Right. And I think at the end of the day, abolition is about shrinking the system, So we know that we can't win and have everything, abolished. Like what were we gonna do? Everybody asks, right? How do we address harm? I want to remind people that everything that harms us is not legal, is not illegal. Right. So the deepest harms like are not being addressed by La Policia or detention centers, right? People ask, where are the murderers? They're outside, yo, they're your neighbors, right? They're out there. And I think abolition again is like the strategies that you use as a lawyer. Everybody, it's about shrinking the system, right? We have to engage in shrinking and dismantling and deconstructing their machine, and I think that's what's super important. And so there's like versus reform versus abolition, right? It's always about shrinking the system and really thinking through, because a lot of reforms haven't worked, right? We see body cameras. It doesn't matter. Like we are deemed people that can be dead in the streets, right? We're disposable. We're deportable. So I think those are the strategies where we also come from, and to again try to abolish, but as we're like deconstructing and like breaking them apart and taking already what they have so we can have it allocated to the things we actually need, right? I know DWN does a lot of work around defunding hate, right? Budget, looking at budget. That's so important. The local city budget work that's happening, right? And then this national defunding ICE budget is like incredible because again, it's shrinking the system, right? So shout out to y'all over there, DWN.
Azadeh, did you want to say anything?
Well, just in terms of, abolition, I think, we are winning, working as part of broad coalitions to end the mass incarceration system. And I should say, Project South is an abolitionist organization, and the National Lawyers Guild I'm also a part of are also abolitionists. And so, as folks working on immigrants' rights, obviously we cannot only be focusing on detention of immigrants. We have to realize that this is part of the larger carceral system. And so in Atlanta, again, as a result of a multi-year grassroots campaign, we were finally able to convince the mayor of Atlanta to end the collusion of the city of Atlanta with ICE, because Atlanta held itself out as being progressive at the same time as it was making money off of detention of immigrants for a number of years. And so we were able to call out that hypocrisy, again, through documentation, through centering the voices of directly impacted folks, meaning, formerly detained immigrants and their family members who were calling for this place to be shut down. And so, that happened, but we knew that was only the first part in the process. We joined the broad coalition led by formerly incarcerated trans and Black women, including the organization Women on the Rise, that was aiming to shut down the Atlanta City Detention Center altogether. And so we're, making a stride towards that goal to shut this jail down and turn it into a community center. And I think that could be a model for, for how sort of, the work should be happening, that, we cannot be working in silos at this moment. We really need to join forces with other folks.
So in terms of this coalitional work and this political moment, I I know a lot of the attendees are probably wondering, what is it that you would want to see from the Biden administration? And I think, as Alejandra has laid out very clearly, the system is working the way it was designed to work, and it really ramped up under Obama and Biden. So in terms of this idea, this strategy of shrinking the system, working together, where's the first fight for y'all? And what do you think is the most effective for those tuning in, whether they're attorneys? I can see there's been some questions about how to assist legally, but also activist work, ally work. Thank you.
I can start. I mean, I'll just say the president has so much power when it comes to detention, actually. Like, the executive authority on immigration is quite huge. And that means that, you know, in some ways, which is frustrating to some degree, because then like things will turn and turn. But actually what we've seen over the last 20 years, especially since 9/11, is so much more money being funneled into ICE and CBP, and then the growth of the system. And, you know, that happened with the creation of DHS under Bush. And then under Obama, we saw this sort of consolidation of facilities, this intention to create a better system, but not reduce. Like, there was no intention, you know, we're going to do a review. Are these facilities okay? You know, let's make some, they got rid of family detention, but then they brought it back, really continuing to see detention as a deterrent strategy. And then Trump was like, okay, let's take this, you know, let's take the system that was like built up, you know, over the years, solidified by Obama, and then, you know, go to the next level. I think Biden has to, you know, go completely, not just roll back, but go even further. And I think there's a lot of strategies for that. I think the two that are really clear is, you know, as Alejandra has been saying, it's about the money. You know, like, ICE has been overspending on detention for years. Congress bails them out, and then they just have more money and more beds. There's absolutely no accountability, and we need to cut their funding. And ultimately, we want to dismantle ICE. We want to abolish ICE. But the, you know, the process is reduce the amount of money going to them, and then start shutting down a lot of these facilities. And again, they have total power to do that. And we're going to ensure we do everything we can to get them to do it.
Yeah, definitely the direct action also, like, against these, like, you know, Amazons, right? All these people that are like gaining from, you know, ICE being out here, from incarceration, being very much well alive, right? Like, I'm seeing here locally more awareness and fights against the Department of Corrections, right? And I think one of the things that I do, that I've heard a lot from people inside prisons that are they call me, that thanked me for turning Arizona blue and getting Trump out. And I'm like, I didn't do that. But I'm like, okay, kind of, we did that, right? But they say, like, Trump at least did something good and decarcerated, right? So I think this is a moment that we also have to talk about free them all, keep talking about freeing folks, and not just in detention centers, right? People keep saying, like, again, the people in detention centers are also felons, people that come from prisons, right? And we have to be okay with fighting for everyone, knowing that the system is what's harmed people. The system is what separated us, kept us hungry, kept us begging, right? All of these things that again, all of these flaws of this democracy, most powerful country in the world, this pandemic has kind of like put dirtied out our dirty laundry in a sense, right? So I think for me, it's just like, we have to keep talking about decarceration, defunding, absolutely. And I think as a border person, I want to see this fucking wall destroyed. I think the fact that there's still a refugee camp at the Mexico and US border is fucking ridiculous. I do not want them to be in cages. I prefer people being, you know, free from cages, but I am not a person that's living in a thin tent at the border with no support and no safety at all. But the fact that there is a refugee camp on this border of ours is just, we have to really take care of that. We have to really push back again. The legacy of Trump is still here, and we need to do something about it ASAP.
Yeah, everything that was said, and I would also just again encourage folks to join the local fights, right? I mean, we were able to in Georgia, we were able to, achieve a lot in the past 4 years. You know, in the most under the most repressive circumstances, we were able to put into place policies limiting collaboration with ICE. Again, taking huge steps towards shutting down the Atlanta Detention Center. And then for lawyers on the call, please do join, local efforts. Be very humble and see what people need, right? Don't assume that you have the answers because you went to law school. So just see what kind of legal support might be needed. And I would also say in terms of what the Biden administration can do, everything that Alejandra and Silky said, I mean, we need to be talking and asking holistic, ask about abolition. I do think that getting the private prison corporations out of the system might be, a good step. I mean, we almost achieved that during the Obama administration, right? In terms of a memo that the Department of that Sally Yates issued. And so, of course, that went out of the window when Jeff Sessions came to power. That was one of the first things that they got rid of. But I do think that that could be accomplished as one of their first asks. I mean, it's just an awful system to put prison corporations whose interest is making money in charge of managing human beings. When you have then the type of system that you come up with is Irvin or the Stewart Detention Center, another awful detention center we have in Georgia, where there's a forced labor program where immigrants are paid between $1 to $4 a day, sometimes not paid at all for the work that the facility would have had to hire regularly waged employees for. So those are the type of injustices that we get.
Yeah. And I just wanted to share too, just as we're getting some lawyer questions, one thing that I've learned from one of my co-abolitionist organizers that's also a lawyer at ACLU locally in Arizona, she just says, like, remember when we're doing litigation, these corporations, ICE, all of that, they're already accounting litigation as part of their some loss, right? That they're already counting for people to be suing them. And that does nothing from the millions of money they're already making. It does nothing to them. So I just want to be clear of that too, that we got to get, very strategic and just like, retailers account for theft, they're accounting for us to sue them. And, so just keep that in mind.
Well, I want to thank all of you for the work you're doing, your badassery, you're thinking out of the box, you're trying to beat a system that is clearly designed to not let you win, right? And I hope the attendees recognize that what you just witnessed are three of the literal most expert activists on these intersectional issues. So as Alejandra has given us our marching orders, it's good to have joy, but it's now time to fight. Melissa, we will get our attendees a list of some of the reports that have been in the chat. And also, I just want to let you all know that Alejandra has a new podcast that's dropping on December 7th called Support, Don't Support. So look for that, and you can check that out on her website, which is in the chat, and also we'll send that out. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Y'all have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.